story of the railways extends deeper into history than the railway locomotive. The very first lines were horse-drawn, primarily in mining endeavours that made use of minecarts that ran on a set of rails. These lines were much smaller than what became the standard, and laid the groundwork for what became the narrow-gauge railway networks in the UK. The first commercial steam locomotive was in fact a narrow-gauge engine named Salamanca, predating Stephenson's rocket by 17 years. Throughout the 19th century, narrow-gauge industrial lines and steam locomotives popped up all around the UK and eventually abroad. Most famous of all are probably the Welsh quarry narrow-gauge railways, of which a number of lines and locomotives persist in the preservation era, including the world-famous pioneers of preservation, the Talyllyn and the Festiniog railways. Despite this extensive history, narrow-gauge railways have only become commercially available as ready-to-run models in 00 gauge in the last decade or so, thanks to improvements in manufacturing techniques and electronics. It's now easier than ever to have a narrow-gauge railway at home, with the continued rise of 009 narrow-gauge models that are 00 gauge in scale and run on N-gauge width track. And today we have my first ever new 009 rolling stock purchase, a set of Bachmann Slate Wagons based on the Slate Wagons found on the Talyllyn Railway. I got these while visiting the Statfold model exhibition and purchased them from John Sutton Models for £45, a nice discount off the £51.95 RRP. The full retail price felt like a lot for what are 3 very small wagon models, which is why I wanted to take a closer look at them and see whether they are truly worth the asking price. In this pack, product code 393-075, you get 3 slate wagons and slate loads. The first thing I noticed and really like is that this isn't just a copy-paste of the same wagon. Each one has a slightly different shade of grey. There's a lighter one, a darker one, and one with a grey somewhere in between, offering some variety straight out the box. Beyond that, the liveries are very basic. There's no lining or emblems on these. The wheel housings and fittings are picked out in black and neatly done so. All the planking supports and rivets atop the wagon are also picked out in black, just as they are on the real wagon, lending some nice darker patches and opportunity for shadows within the livery. One big omission, however, is printed running numbers, which would have fleshed out the individuality of the wagons further, and can be found on the preserved examples. This would have also added some more complexity to the livery, which otherwise is on the plainer side of things. Included with these wagons is a slate load for each, modelled to resemble the slate that would have been carried. The slate loads themselves do look almost identical. While their slate grey coloration certainly sells them well, perhaps a more bluish load or a lighter coloured slate load would have helped bring even more variety to this pack. All in all, the slate loads do the job, and I don't feel any burning desire to replace them with something more realistic. Removing the slate loads reveals a wooden plank flooring effect in the wagons, which has a dark brown woody coloration and texture. This is a nice touch and introduces another colour to the otherwise plain livery, but I question why it was included, as I can't see any wooden planking of this colour on the floor of the real wagons, from the pictures I've found. Also notably different are the wheels. On the preserved wagons these are spoked, whereas here they are solid discs. Spoked wheels are found in N-gauge wagons, so should be possible in 009 too. So either Bachmann didn't care enough to give accurate wheels and opted to use stock parts, or the curving of the spokes on the wheels in real life was just too difficult to tool in 009. Perhaps we'll never know which is the real case. The buffer beams are fitted with square dome buffers and not much else, and the rims of the buffers are missing the black lining seen on the real wagons. Rather dominating the model below the beams are the huge 009 couplings, which features both a loop and hook in an M355 pocket. On such a small wagon, they do feel very overbearing and detract from the realism. While every wagon needs some sort of coupling, and this type is standard for 009 products, I do wish they were less overt, but there are alternatives on the market for switching over to something more subtle. The undersides have next to no detail besides the coupling them pocket and the Bachmann logo, so there's not much to talk about here. The axles do just fit into housings and don't have bearings, but at this scale, bearings would be quite difficult to pull off. On the scales, an individual wagon without a load comes in at a mere 6 grams, down to its mostly plastic construction. Adding the load doesn't improve this much, upping the weight per wagon to 9 grams. Overall, for £45 I've ended up with only 27 grams of wagon, which is a questionable £1.66 per gram. While I acknowledge there's a lot of time spent on tooling, design, production and shipping, I still struggle to see how this ends up totalling up to an RRP of £52 or £1.92 per gram. From this lens, at full price this seems to be a total Bachmann rip-off. On the other side of the coin, some of this cost may be down to how difficult it is producing wagons this small, while keeping the crisp detail and production quality. Plus, for 009 locos with smaller motors, you want lighter wagons that don't put as much strain on them. That's enough whining about price for now. I'll pick this up again in my final thoughts at the end of the video. Overall, these wagons do a fine job of depicting this kind of Welsh slate wagon, with a nice variation in the coloration, if a little plain overall. Whether they justify their own cost may come down to how well they perform down on the narrow gauge loop. With the slate removed, they are a third lighter and much more free rolling. When loaded up with slate, the wagons roll nicely but do come to an eventual stop. Load or no load, nothing here indicates any excessive friction on the axles or any performance issues. Next up for testing was the couplings, with my Kato Festiniog prints. Weirdly, it just doesn't seem to want to couple to the locomotive. The wagons themselves have coupled together fine, so perhaps there's a compatibility issue between the Bachmann and Kato couplings, despite them having the same overall design. I'll give it a little helping hand, but won't hold this issue against the slate wagons. With everything now coupled up nicely, let's take them round the board to see how they do on the points and board joins. Now that they are coupled, there doesn't seem to be any issues. I've now installed a runaround loop for my narrow gauge line, and the wagons are fine on the first set of Code 80 set-track points. They pass fine over the other set, so let's try reversing them over the two sets. Not a single derailment. The final test, baseboard joins. Coupling issues aside, there's not a single performance issue here. On to my final verdict. For decoration, it's a plain and simple livery with some minor variety in colour shading. While they are not 100% accurate to the Taliclin prototypes, these sell the look of used slate wagons well. Running number decals would have helped differentiate these and add some more to draw the eye, but apart from that there was nothing to fault with the livery. Rivets and other details were painted up nicely, the decoration does the job and I'm happy with it. Details and features, once again were quite plain on this front. There's the wooden effect to the planking, picked out rivet and support details, and the handy inclusion of removable slate loads to help fill the wagons, giving the option to run them loaded, empty or mixed. Besides that, there's not much else to chat about, or that's noticeably absent on this kind of wagon. The couplings are very bulky and massive compared to the rest of the wagon, so could be swapped out for something smaller, but again this is all down to personal preference. As the loads are included, I can't think of anything more that I would ask for from this model, so I'm happy with what I've received. Quality. Besides the axles and wheels, the construction here is all plastic. However, given the size and scale of the locomotives that will be pulling these, keeping them lightweight makes plastic the right choice of material in this instance. Die-cast wagons of this size would be hard to pull off, and a lot more strain would be put on the small motors of 009 locomotives. On the whole, the materials are kept simple and do the role they were designed for. Performance. Coupling issues aside, as it's not likely the wagon's fault, there were no issues with going over point work or baseboard joins. The wagons roll reasonably well when loaded and really well freely when unloaded, making them nice and easy for 009 engines to pull. They were top performers. And finally, again, we're on to price, which contextualises a lot of what's come before, and it becomes a sticking point. Paying almost £2 per gram of plastic at the full RRP makes these a really hard sell. Alas, plastic was needed to keep the wagons light, and they do look and play the part really well with only some minor suggestions for improvement. At the £45 I paid, compared to the modern, newly tooled 00 gauge wagons costing £30 each, £15 per Slate wagon doesn't feel half bad, but they don't come with the more complicated separate details or features. Simpler wagons should mean an adjusted price. These are more than half as simple as a 00 gauge wagon. The Slate loads do add some value, so you get 3 wagon loads and 3 wagons for £45, rather than having to buy the loads separately for an additional price. I had to look to the wider market on this one, and other manufacturers like Pico offer triple Slate wagon packs for £30 to £35. The Bachmann Thomas tooling for the 009 Slate wagons released under that range come to a cost of at least £25 each, so getting 3 would tally up to an eye-watering £75 to £90 for essentially the same product. Perhaps with the loads, £45 is the right price for this pack, assuming production costs do necessitate such a price, and these actually look like quite the bargain compared to the Thomas editions. They're middle of the road in the market, and the most cost-effective way of building up trains of this type of wagon. Perhaps I'm feeling generous, but I'll give Bachmann the price point today. Let me know in the comments if you feel this is priced correctly compared to the rest of the 009 market. Overall, that's a full house of scores. I can highly recommend these as an essential item for anyone looking at getting started in 009, or wanting to model Slate Industries or Welsh Narrow Gauge Railway specifically. There's a few tweaks that could be made to spruce them up, but they're all easy fixes most modelers can achieve themselves, and perhaps we'll get some enjoyment out of doing so. So, what do you think of these Bachmann Slate wagons? Do you think they could be sold for a lesser price without harming Bachmann's profit margins? And have you also encountered any coupling issues between them and other 009 products produced by other manufacturers? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for checking out the first of what may be a number of 009 reviews I do, as I develop my narrow gauge section of the layout. I'll see you all in another video again very soon. Take care.